Managing a small team or business comes with a unique set of challenges. With limited resources and manpower, it's easy for things to feel chaotic and out of your control. How can you, as a leader, accomplish your goals while keeping your team engaged, effective, and accountable? This podcast will give you practical strategies you can implement now to lead your team or business to reach its fullest potential. Welcome to the Organizing Chaos podcast with your host, Danny Coleman.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Organizing Chaos, where we find small practical strategies for small teams and small businesses. And yes, this is another audio-only version. I'm getting my new camera in the mail soon from Amazon. I'm actually, I'll go ahead and tease this a little bit. I've got a series of interviews coming up with all types of different small business people. I'm also interviewing maybe one or two people who are still in a corporation. I would love to get their perspective and ask them some questions. Mostly we're going to be getting small business owners interviewed here soon. I've got a couple managers lined up and a couple of employees, people who are there, boots on the ground, doing the grunt work, getting some of their perspectives too. So what I am really excited about is basically we're going to be taking the show on the road, if you will. And so you're not going to be seeing my normal whiteboard in the back, just like, of course, you're not seeing it right now anyways, but you won't be seeing it for a little while because we're going to be going out and about, meeting these people either in public places or in places where their business is located, and we'll be getting all these different perspectives. So I'm really excited. I can't wait. If you are interested in being part of that, shoot me an email, danny@dannycoleman.me. And we will reach out to you and get you lined up to be interviewed on the podcast sometime. And again, even if you are not somewhere in the Middle Tennessee area where I'm located, we can still do a virtual interview, which is the only one I've actually done so far. There was the one I did with my business partner, Brian. You can check that one out. That was a really good one. Interview with the Visionary was the name of the episode. I don't remember what number it was. But yeah, if you have any interest in that whatsoever, and you have a perspective that you would like to share, I would love to hear it. And I think the listeners would too. So that said, I want to talk today about quarterly plans. So quarterly plans, that sounds so stiff and corporate. However, there are certain things that corporations or larger businesses do that smaller businesses need to do as well. So I find it, I doubt that you are unaware of what a quarterly plan is. But just to put it very simply, in the way that I use it, it is a plan for 90 days. Something that a number or either in one or more large or big rock items that are going to get accomplished over the next 90 days. So I might have said this example before, but I think that it's worth repeating. There was once this is a story, parable. There was once a professor who took a large jar, like one of those jars that you have like ingredients in on the counter, maybe in your kitchen, like flour and rice and stuff. He took one of those big jars and was like, all right, and he put all these big rocks in there, right? And he's like, all right, said to his class, is this full? Is this jar full? And they're like, well, yeah, you can't fit any more big rocks in there. It's full. He's like, aha. And then he goes and he pours some pea gravel in there, right? So the pea gravel falls in, bounces around all around the crevices and the cracks, between these big rocks. And then he does that till he can't pour any more pea gravel in there. And then he asks his classes again, like, is it full now? And they're like, oh, okay, we see what he's doing here. Like, yeah, it's definitely full now. Then he takes out some fine-grained sand, dry sand, takes that and pours that in there. That finds its way around all the crevices, all the little rocks and big rocks that are in there so far. And then he's like, now is it full? And people are like, okay, sir, like he can't get anything else in there. And then lastly, he puts in water. He fills it up with water until it's at the brim, then closes the jar. And then he says something to the effect of, do you think that I could have filled this jar up with this much stuff if I had changed around the order in which I put these things in? Is there any way, could I have put the same amount of stuff in if I'd done it in any different order? And the truth is no. If he would have put all that water in then he would have put those big rocks in there that would have caused the water to overflow. If he would have put the sand in after the water, that also would not have worked because the sand would have become soft and not been fine grained enough to fall between all those rocks. So he could not have done it in any other order. And what the parable is, the lesson that you're supposed to get out of this is you've got to put your big rocks in first. So here are the 3 different reasons of why quarterly plans are important, right? So reason number 1, and I'm sorry I don't have my marker board. It's so weird for me to not have it to show you guys, but I think that you can visualize it. And I think actually a lot of people end up listening to the podcast audio only anyways. So item number 1, there are 2 types of work, right, that your small team or small business is partaking in. There's the day-to-day work, right? That's the stuff that always has to get done. It's the daily activities that make your business a business. And then there is the long-term work. Now, most small businesses that I've worked either for as an employee or with in a consultant type capacity, they were not doing really much of any of the long-term work. It would be in spurts or sporadically. Maybe when things were slow, they'd make some progress on some long-term stuff. However, the thing is, if you do that, that's first of all, doing some long-term work is better than none. So I definitely don't want to dismiss anyone who is at least doing some long-term work. But if you're doing it sporadically, that's like working out for 3 months a year and then being like, oh yeah, I'm healthy. Like, it doesn't work like that. Working out is, and I've used culture as an example before. A lot of things really go back to exercise. Is that when you're only working out that frequently, you're not really staying healthy. You're healthy for a small period of time, but then it slops off, and you gain 10 pounds, and then your next year you try to lose that 10 pounds again. Maybe you lose 5, and then it gets slow again, and you gain another 10 pounds. So you really never make any real progress forward. You take maybe two steps forward, 3 steps back, and so it's just kind of a give and take of progress. There's no really long-term gains made. So that's how it is at most small teams and small businesses that I've worked for. If that's not the case, if you're already doing quarterly plans or you regularly are making progress on long-term goals, that's fantastic. Pat yourself on the back. You're an exception. So this, my message, I want to try to help all the small teams and small businesses out there. And so that's why quarterly plans are so important. You need to identify what's your day-to-day work and what's your long-term work. And your long-term work needs to be planned for. And that's what quarterly plans are. That's why they're important, is because it gives you an opportunity to sit down with leadership or with your whole team to plan out, hey guys, what can we get done in the next 90 days? So in the next 90 days, in addition to the day-to-day work that we got to do, how are we going to also accomplish some big goals? And I call them big rocks because of that rock example that I used earlier. What are our big rocks for the next 90 days? So that is the first reason. Number 1, 2 types of work. Make sure you separate them, and that is where you identify the long-term work that needs to happen. Now, next thing is 90 days, right? Why is 90 days the magic number? Well, that's because 90 days is real. It's realistic in both senses. In terms of it is far enough away that you feel like, yeah, I can get this done over the next 3 months. That's a season, that's a quarter of a year, or you've got, or you've got, sorry, I lost train of thought. And then of course it's short term enough that it's not like, that's at the end of the year. Yeah, sure, we'll hit those sales goals, or sure, we'll get that project finished or whatever. When it's a year off, that's too far away. So 90 days is that sweet spot of giving you just enough time to get something big done, right? Making you feel like it's realistic, but at the same time, it's close enough to feel like there's an actual deadline there. So that's why 90 days to me is a magic number. I used to start, when I would consult with people, I would start with a year-long plan, and then we'd break it down into 90 days at a time. But in my experience, just too much changes in a small business over the course of a year. So I would rather us just do 90 days at a time and hit those goals than to set goals for the year and only hit 3 out of 10 of them. And so that's kind of why I think 90 days are the way to go. Quarterly plans are the way to go for businesses, not small businesses. That said, I'm not discouraging setting any type of year-long goals or any type of year-long plans. But I will say that in my experience, the most success that you're going to have is when you work 90 days at a time. Because if you also have to think about this too, the people who are on your team, they may not, because they're working so much day-to-day activity type work, they may hear you talk about year-long goals, and it's just like, okay, cool. Like, it just doesn't have any meaning for them. But when you have 90-day goals, it allows you guys to not only plan every 90 days for these large rocks, but get to celebrate at the end of every 90 days for when you hit those big rocks, when you accomplish those goals. So it gives you more opportunities to celebrate, and that, in my experience, helps keep momentum going a whole lot better. So that's my second point, is 90 days is more real. My third point about why quarterly plans are important is that too much changes in a year. And that just really relates back to what I said earlier. You might set a goal of like, okay, maybe let's say right now, let's say you're a coffee shop. Like right now, our average sale is, $3 per person. Right? Our average customer spends $3, and you want to try to get that up to 10, right? Well, 10 might be realistic over the course of a year, but if that's the only goal people are shooting for, and like every time you guys meet, you're just like, hey, how much has it gone up? You're like, okay, well, we're at 320 now per customer. And the next time you guys meet, oh, it's at 325 now per customer. Next time you guys meet, oh, it's at 375 now. That whole $10, average order is so far away that there's no real pressure behind getting it done. But instead of 10, right, let's just say, okay, so we'll cut it down into quarters. So let's just say quarter one, you're trying to go from 3 to 5. Quarter two, trying to go from 5 to 7. Quarter three, trying to go from 7 to 9, and then the last quarter is a whole lot easier, right? You go from 10 or 9 to 10. So that's just me spitballing right now, an example, but hopefully you can see what I'm talking about here is when you set those shorter goals, it's a lot more achievable. I'll give you a personal example. I hated running for like the longest period. I would always tell people I'm a short guy. I'm short and stout. I lift heavy things. I just don't run, right? I don't run long distances. I can do some sprints, and that's it. I just kind of kept telling myself that was the case. And that's a different topic altogether about what you tell yourself in your head you can and can't do. But I digress. I wanted to run a 5K. I don't remember what it was that possessed me. I was just like, I want to run a 5K. And there's a 5K called the Mule Kick here in Columbia, Tennessee. It happens every Mule Day. And the first year that I did it, I was like, okay, well, I hate running. Like, I hate running. And like, if you asked me to run for 10 minutes straight, I'd just been like, oh, like I hated that. I was like, okay, so my first goal is I'm going to run for 5 minutes, a continuous rate for 5 minutes on the treadmill. And what I did to kind of cut this story, make it quicker, is from the time that I decided I was going to do this 5K to the time that I ran the 5K, I'd wanted to get to the point where I was fine with running continuously for 30 minutes straight with no breaks. And so that was my goal. So what was a whole lot easier than saying like, all right, I got to get to 30 minutes and then just every week just kind of see how close I got to 30 minutes before I tuckered out. Instead, I just kept on saying, okay, so this week's goal is run for 5 minutes. Next week's goal, 7 minutes. Next week's goal, 9 minutes, so on and et cetera. And I think I basically kind of went up in 2 to 3 minute increments, which were so much more achievable for me. So at the end of the week, I could throw myself a little party and be happy with the success because I hit that goal. Those smaller goals are called, I think, quick wins. I think is that people like to call it as a quick win. So give yourself quick wins because it builds momentum. Versus when you set those hairy, audacious goals at the end of the year, everyone's like, yeah, totally. Hope we got a whole year to do that. We can do that. It's just not real enough. So anyways, those are my 3 points about why quarterly plans are so important. To recap, you got to make sure you realize you have 2 types of work that you're responsible for in your business. There's the day-to-day and there's the long-term. And one thing I didn't say about that I'll say in parentheses here is that if you aren't doing long-term work, then you're not innovating and you're not improving. You will only be surviving day to day. Nothing will ever really change for you. And eventually the world will pass you by and you will wither and die. So anyways, you do have to have long-term work. So if you see that you only do the day-to-day work and there is no long-term work going on at all in your business, you either need to get on it right now or you need to accept the fact that how your days are going will never ever change. So anyways, I digress. Separate the 2 types of work, day-to-day and the long-term, right? Your long-term are your big rocks. Meet with your team. I'm going to have another episode about practical, how to do quarterly meetings. But then meet with your team, figure out what you can do over the next 90 days. And then commit to those next 90 days that you were going to, make sure that, again, I'm going to get into details on how to do it, but just pick what you're going to do in the next 90 days, set that as your goal, and keep it front and center. And then lastly, remember, yearly goals are great, but more often than not, they become a discouragement, or they're like a mute discussion point, because it's like, hey, how are we going on that, getting to that $10 per order average? It's like, oh, well, we made some improvements from last year, or from last, week or month or whatever, but, we're still at, $4, or they can be discouraging for people to kind of see how slowly they're getting towards things. So those are my 3 things. I hope that this was relevant to you in some way or another. I hope this encourages you to start doing quarterly plans if you're not already. And I don't usually pitch my services on the podcast, but I will say that I love doing quarterly plans. I think it's so much fun because, I like planning. That's part of what I do. But it's fun to work with a team that's not my own and help them set some goals and see them achieve them. Just because, like I said, so many small businesses aren't doing it, that I love helping people do that. So if you're ever interested in getting some help or guidance on this, be sure to let me know. You can get me at danny@dannycoleman.me. I'd be happy to help you do this. But like I said, quarterly goals are so important towards your long-term progress in your company innovating and staying fresh and progressing towards bigger and better things. So please take this episode and check out the next one that comes out next week, where I talk about how to actually do these quarterly planning meetings. And again, if you need any help on that, hit me up, danny@dannycoleman.me. Thanks so much for tuning in. Share, like, subscribe, all that fancy jazz. Leave me a review, if you will, please, on either iTunes or Stitcher. Check me out on Spotify, too. I oftentimes forget to mention that. Spotify is my favorite music player. I'm on there. You can find me, the Organizing Chaos Podcast. And guys, I hope that you have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later.
Want more? Go to dannycoleman.me to download Danny's free small business hiring guide, which includes tips, templates, and tools, plus a step-by-step process you can use to find and keep high-quality employees for your small team or business.